Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. Now, briefly, I want to cover why on earth would anyone want to submit to a lit mag or journal or press, right? What's the point of it? Is it a complete waste of time? And I would say no, it's not. I'm just going to share an example, right? We've had poets, right, who got their work into Dippity, right? Dippity Lit Mag, and some of them ended up as readers on our team and volunteer staff. And so that's just an example, it can open up doors or gateways into the publication space. Some readers end up, going into other roles on the magazine or the journal and growing from that and adding that on their resume. And over time, I've seen poets in the community who got their work published or accepted through a lit mag, and over time they grew and grew how many publications they got into, and they started getting invites to host workshops, to partake more in events in the community, and they were getting paid opportunities more so for discussing their work and things of that nature, and holding events. So it can absolutely be a gateway to opportunities. Sometimes agents or others in the publication space may, see your work and reach out. It does happen from time to time, Of course, there are some lit magazine journals that are considered more popular than others, or top tier, I'm not going to name them, but of course, some have been around longer than others and have a much wider audience and reach, right? So, if you get accepted into one of those, again, more eyes on your work, right? Not to say some poets, right, the main reason they don't submit to literary journals, magazines, and presses, right, is because of the fees, right? There are a lot of fees. There's a very only quite a handful, not a handful, but less than probably 100 maybe in the world. There could be more. I could be wrong on this. Don't take it for my word. But there are absolutely very few lit mags and places to submit to that are fee-free and pay you, right? So a benefit of some lit mags and journals right out there is that they sometimes award a cash amount for your acceptance, right? They pay you for your work. Not all do that because it's really tough, right, to pay every single poet for an acceptance. Not everyone has that funding. Not everyone has, as I mentioned, an affiliation with a university or anything, or any grants or anything like that, right? A lot of it is self-funded, or sometimes editors, again, are taking out of their own salaries to pay writers. Or sometimes they've done crowdfunding for the year, or, they have others who support them, and that funding isn't always necessarily received year upon year. So, yeah. But it's awesome when you do get paid for your work, right? I will share, I had an acceptance a few years back, and I got paid for one poem. I think it was $50, $50. Some contests have much higher awards though, right? In the community space, I've seen $1,000, $2,000, things like that. And some other things they tack on to winning a contest or writing contest. Now, contests typically have much higher fees, right? Chapbook contest, even $20. Poetry submissions, they have fees. Again, I mentioned this, around $3 to $5. It all adds up for the poet as well, all those fees. And it can, if you keep trying and trying, you can end up spending several $100s on your poetry submissions nowadays because of all the fees. In the old days, quite a few just mailed in their submissions, and it's still, the cost of postage, but still, the amount of fees today is completely different from what existed, way back in, traditional days, and how others got into lit mags and magazines, mailing their work in and other things like that. And there were more newspapers back then, right? Physical newspapers. But there are some places that actually have a little newspaper type publication out there that are pretty cool. So there are different formats of lit mags and journals. It's very, very fascinating, the different publication formats, right, that lit mags and journals take. I've seen everything from postcard series to, traditional styled magazines and zines and zines. Yeah. Yeah. So there are so many opportunities in the lit mag world and space once you dive into it and get acceptances, but Not to say it's the only way, it's not the only way to get your work out there. Again, you could totally take all of your work and publish it yourself, or go through a route of getting, an agent or place a publisher, right? The thing about, traditional publishers and things of that nature, they usually cost a lot of money, right? Thousands of dollars, and the cover design, the marketing, they charge you for all of that, and the copies. And sometimes, your event doesn't turn out the way you wanted, or sometimes there's issues. And sometimes some publishers are bloodsuckers, right? Or there's some cons and scams out there, so you have to be really careful. And even lit mags and presses, right? Some of them are just pop-up shops, right? That are you never hear back from, and they ghost you. Like, same thing with like job applications, right? I'm sure we've all gotten ghosted from jobs, or never heard back and things like that. Same thing, it happens. There are some illegitimate or false ones out there that never fulfill on their, what they say they'll do. And that is so heartbreaking, because you invest so much time in it. So there's a risk there, a level of risk submitting to lit mags and journals, right? But the thing to avoid that, to really do research on the lit mag a little bit, look at, what some of your friends or in the community who have submitted to, and to see, see the reviews on it. There are reviews of some online, even and social media, things like that, and do a little bit of digging. There are some great newsletters out there, some, like Chill Subs, some news Substacks that really give insight on what's happening on the back end, or what poets are reporting when in their submission process, and what it's like for them, or what issues they ran into with a certain lit mag or press. And I think it's so important that others inform others about that, because you don't ever want to be conned or scammed, right, of anything, when it comes to your writing and your work, which you put your heart into and pour it into, absolutely. So, yeah. Again, it is, so when you submit to a lit mag, it's something you could put on your resume, or you end up working for one, and whether it be a volunteer experience or as a paid staff member, one day it could happen, so it is absolutely worth it. I would say, it's a way for you to reach a whole nother audience or more people with your work. There are absolutely some really beautiful lit mags, journals, and presses out there that invest a lot of energy into it, and to make sure it's presented so beautifully, right? So oftentimes you will, run into, rejections as a writer. It's just bound to happen, right? There's no way you'll get, all of your work accepted in every single place you ever submit to. If that happens, then wow, that's amazing, great. But usually, for a lot of us as writers, it's an uphill battle, right? No matter what you do in life, like any passion you have, right, you're going to have no's, or people are going to say, yeah, that's not for us, or it's not popular. Like Dippity, I'll give an example. Like, I presented Dippity to a few others, and, they're like, it wouldn't be popular with our audience, so we can't have you. Or they never end up picking us up in any bookstores, not to my knowledge, we're not in any major retailers that I can think of, or anything like that. Or, I'm not aware of any stores picking us up and things like that. So, lit mags tend to reach, they have a readership level. Some track their readership level, or what their audience is exactly, like the number of subscribers they have. So some do that. So, it's sad that most things in life, I'd say, is like seen as a numbers game. How many followers do you have? How many followers does the lit mag have? How many followers do you all have, right? Some publishers, like I submitted an application, for example, guys, to a publisher several years back, and it says, how many social media followers do you have, right? Like, why is that even a question? I feel like they should just look at your work, right? Rather than how many followers you have existing, what your level is, right? It's just unfortunate, but yeah. Anyways, so don't necessarily always look at the amount of followers the publication has, and social media. Not everyone uses it. Honestly, I've come into contact with a lot of poets and writers who don't use social media. And you should really look at the quality of the publication, and see what it looks like. Try to find, usually there are images online of the publication. There are, places you can see where poets share their thoughts. Some poets have done reels on social media, posted reviews online, things like that. On Reddit, I see reviews all the time of lit mags and journals out there, presses even, particularly more so presses, in chapbooks and stuff. So, yeah. So I think that's all I can think of. Yeah, so if you submit to a lit mag that pays, that's a little pocket money for you. And sometimes, again, they have, some really cool contest rates, that may be, several $1,000s, or have other opportunities for you again. So it's not always the case. Usually when you're submitting to a lit mag journal, most of them don't pay you. So it really is something I see more so others share, like with their friends and family through their network, or things like that. And it's something, where you learn from. Every time you submit to a place again, you learn from that, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And you can grow as a writer. Some places have feedback options, like Dippity. We had sometimes some feedback windows to poets, right? Like I would do voice feedback for about up to 30 minutes. Some places do typed feedback about a couple pages, and that's usually an extra fee. Some places have free feedback windows. So, you can get feedback from some writers who have been in the writing, the space for quite a while, and it can be beneficial to you, how to improve your work, how to strengthen it. It helps poets. And sometimes, working with others through writing workshops and things, you can improve your work, right? You can learn from that. And I've seen poets who revised their work based on feedback and ended up getting acceptances, right? Things like that. And it's cool to see that the feedback helped them. And yeah. But again, it takes a lot of time and energy to submit to lit mags and journals. It is something you have to be really passionate about, to really do. And sometimes, you'll come out empty-handed, right? No acceptances for the year. It happens, right? And things like that. Sometimes back to back. And yeah, sometimes we have writer's block, right? Things like that. And so many things that impact our work and writing. And yeah. So I may do an episode covering what are my tips for submitting to lit mags and journals, just briefly a little bit dive into that. And yeah, so that's all I can think of for this episode. So if you haven't submitted to a lit mag, journal, or press before and are interested, I'd say start off with, there are several fee-free ones, with no fees. So start off with some of those, and go from there. As you get some acceptances, under your belt, or, you can, work on zeroing in on a couple that have perhaps fees that have been around for a while, and try. But I would say be cautious, because again, fees can add up. You may see, what you have in your bank account go down to near nothing, right? With all those fees, right? It can be expensive. So I would say maybe budget it out if you ever submit to any fee ones, right? Really set aside a budget. Don't go over that. Say I'm going to dedicate this amount, to submitting poetry submissions, and I'll never go over that, because if you keep trying and trying and trying, I know I tried submitting to a place a couple years back, and I got 3 rejections for them, and $15 gone just like that, and you can't get that back because it's not refundable. So yeah, it can be tough. So places sometimes mention their fee waivers, so you can write in again if there's absolutely, no way you can pay a fee. You can usually write into them or ask them for a waiver for your submission, and things like that. We have a fee waiver at Dippity again for disabled writers for a chapbook series. And yeah, I do hate fees. So just some things to keep in mind, a lot of the times I'll mention, just add this real quick here. May not be real quick. I'm thinking of other things. Sorry, guys. So, the thing about lit mags and journals that you really have to read very carefully is the rights to your work, right? Do they have first serial rights to it? Do you get your rights back? Do they revert to the author after publication? Or some places hold your work for 1 to 2 years and say you can't publish it anywhere until after that time frame, or X amount of months or years. So you have to be really careful, because if you ever want to use that work in another publication, then you're locked in. Some places have you sign a contract or agreement even, right, for every acceptance. certain things, especially with chapbooks. There's usually a contractual agreement. But some places over poems do have you sign a letter or something to, not always, not always. So you have to read the fine print on sites very, very carefully, and read what rights they have to your work. If you're ever not sure, just ask them, because it doesn't hurt. You want to make sure, if your work gets accepted, that you can, use it elsewhere. If you really love that piece, or you're writing, whether it be short stories, poetry, etc., photography even, you want to make sure you can have rights to your work. It's so important, right? Because it's your work, right? They shouldn't be necessarily holding on to it forever and collecting, profits from it, saying, and it can hurt you in the long run, right? Things like that. If you're not careful, some places have very bizarre wording and things like I've come across from time to time. And I think it's so important that poets have rights to their work forever, that it's their work. Mostly the time, like with Dippity and other lit mags and journals out there, they just request that you say this was first published in, this lit mag. You put their name underneath in small print in whichever future publication it is. Or sometimes if you don't like it showing up like right beneath the poem, I think some poets add it towards the back of the book, or like acknowledgments of where the pieces were published before, or things like that. And, so again, some lit mags and journals, right, they have that with the rights thing. So just be mindful about that. And, it's a good way to get your work out there and to get into the community and to form connections with others. I'd say absolutely. Again, you never know who may come across your work, and I think that's really cool. All the readers, and fellow poets and writers who follow the work. Sometimes I've seen poets share, in their stories, the work of others, and be just truly supportive. So it's a wonderful community. So I mean, there are cases where, lit mags and journals or editors are seen as like gatekeeping, right? Gatekeepers. But really, I think the whole thing about that is more so, really look at, where you're submitting, like, does it fit the theme? Does it fit the space, right? Each lit mag and journal press has a certain vibe to it, right? Absolutely. So take that in consideration, right? Like, don't, oftentimes, I'll cover this in probably the next episode, or like, tips for maybe getting acceptances, or how to really do that, or just like things that to take in consideration to really try and get an acceptance, and to be mindful of. Again, there are various themes and things like that, so you can't just submit anything to a lit mag, right? You have to read very carefully what they're looking for. So otherwise it'll get rejected like right away. And there are cases where some lit mags and journals, they have other calls open, and they may see it fits a different call, or feature thing, and may ask you to submit maybe later on, totally, and try again. But so that's everything. I'm trying to keep these under like 25-ish minutes, and so I hope this helps you. And so the next episode I may touch base on like tips for acceptances, or what to do maybe if you keep getting rejections. We'll see, one or the other. I'll think of some other topics and go from there. So take care and have awesome days ahead, or have a wonderful rest of your day. Yeah.